Very cool. All right, guys, what do you say? Are you ready to jump in?
That's a dangerous decision to give either of us a microphone. Just warning you now.
I'll blame Justin then.
That seems reasonable. That seems reasonable.
So I guess one thing, yeah, for sure. One thing to note here, right? So yeah, we do work for PatchMyPC, but this isn't necessarily a PatchMyPC specific session or anything. This is just WSUS and updates and maintenance and all that kind of fun stuff. So we just happen to deal with patching a lot.
What do you mean maintenance? I thought we don't touch WSUS.
That's right, we don't.
All right, so yeah, kind of as Cody was saying here, this is going to be a little bit of a kind of controlling the chaos of WSUS session here. So a little bit about us first. My name is Jordan Menzing. I am a Microsoft MVP in the EMS space. I work a lot with software updates. As Cody mentioned, we both work for PatchMyPC. I'm from Michigan. A little bit of information here, and I'm pretty sure we can probably make sure people get the slide deck. And I promise this won't be death by PowerPoint. We're going to jump over into demos. We just like to have something so that we can actually give you something with some information in it to take away to kind of flip back to. And I have some reasonable-ish homins of video games, ramen, and dogs, or something other. I'm up to 4 dogs now.
Yeah, so I'm Cody Mathis. You can usually find me doing all kinds of silly things over the pandemic with keyboards. It's been a hobby I've kind of picked up, and it's infected a few of my coworkers. I'm from Michigan as well. Jordan and I are actually about an hour from each other. Yeah, oh, my System Center dudes. That is not my blog.
No, not
but
that.
That's okay.
Sorry. I copy-pasted bad.
Yeah, no problem at all. So that's not my blog, but that's an awesome website. So that's totally a
not
thing.
Not that one. The other one that you do. The other
yeah.
one. The other SMS one thing. Yeah.
It's Sysman Squad is
Sysman Squad. I typed wrong. Yeah.
No problem. Didn't want to be. Yeah. Not me. But yeah.
So let's start with the lie you've all been told, right? So over the years, kind of in the past, when ConfigMgr and the software update point in WSUS first came all together even back in the 2007 and probably even earlier than that days, one of the big things that was always pushed on to us configuration manager admins or towards the idea is you set up your software update point, you got your updates all configured, and then you just kind of you ignored it, right? And that was it. You didn't want to touch it. You wanted to leave it alone. You got all the green lights. You saw your green lights in your site components, and you said, we're good. We're never going to touch it ever again. Don't care what happens. We're just never going to touch it. And if it does, our solution is we're just going to burn it to the ground and build a new one. It's fine, right? Treat it the same way as if you found a spider. And that's not 100% true anymore at all. In fact, it's really actually kind of important that you do some maintenance now. And so some of the big things though is what does that mean? What does maintenance mean? So there's kind of a couple of different kinds and types of maintenance you can deal with. The first big one here is that at the end of the day, it is a database, right? It's a database of a bunch of XML files, more or less, right? There's some other things in there, but realistically, WSUS updates and all that is a bunch of XML data that all lives inside of a database for people. And in order for clients to actually be able to access that data successfully, we need to have some type of way to effectively scan against that. So we need to configure either some SQL maintenance, some Windows internal database maintenance, maybe some IIS stuff, and then of course we need to clean up the old updates, which kind of brings us around to a question of, but why?
Yeah,
well,
so
go ahead, Cody. Yep.
For the why, right? The perspective I try to take on this is that at the end of the day, WSUS is a Windows app. It's an IIS app, and it is going to be subject to all of the pitfalls that any scaling app is going to have, right? You're going to have performance degradation. You're going to have resource allocation issues. And the issue creeped up over time with WSUS. There was a finite and smaller number of updates that even existed, right? And then as time went on, more operating systems, more products, more things are supported. It just keeps growing, and it starts to become a bigger issue, right? So the old prescriptive idea that you don't touch it stops applying when the actual use of the product has changed. I think that's kind of, for me, the big why.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of something that's interesting to note too. Is if you look at some of the history of WSUS and kind of some of how it got built. We were recently doing some testing where we tried to break it on purpose for reasons. We'll talk a little more about that later. But if you go back and you look, as recent as Windows XP, which I know XP isn't exactly recent, right? But you can see how naming standards even and the structure of the data that lived in WSUS has changed and shifted over time. Some of the updates that we saw when we were testing this, because we were trying to see if we could sync every single XP update known to forever out there. And they were like weird, like security update for, I don't remember what it was. Like, it was just called security update. That was the title.
Yep.
Like,
yep. Critical update December 17th. Okay.
Yeah. That's super helpful as to what that is, right? And so as naming standards have advanced, as the technologies have advanced for the different operating systems, as we've gotten the different features of Windows 10, and how those things have gone on, more and more data has been stacked into, and more features and functionalities have been stacked into something that's been essentially considered feature complete since, what, 2007, I think, I want to say ish. I mean, I think really the only major core change since then has been anything to do with the Windows 10 features, right, that have been added on for how the encryption of content goes through. So that technology and all of those pieces and all that information, everything like that, was all very much so geared and sized and scaled to that. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and jump out of PowerPoint here. I'm going to change screen shares real quick, unless you have an overwhelming desire to do so.
Not immediately. I think you've got it pulled up.
Okay. Pull this up real quick. We'll jump over here and talk a couple of maintenance things real quick. Sure. No. Remote desktop. All right. So first things first, in terms of maintenance, if you haven't done these already, the first one that really just to take a quick look at and see is we come over here into site configuration. If we go to sites, the configuration manager team recognized that there's a big need for maintenance. One of the big places that they were getting a lot of pain in still was in the software update space. And so one of the things that got added, both as a result of some community push as well as just some internal things, is we have this wonderful set of these 3 maintenance checkboxes right here. And I highly recommend that you go out, and if you don't have these checked today, that you should go out and look at checking them. One of the things that we noticed recently, and Cody, I don't know if you want to talk about this a little bit, since you're the one that was testing this, is just how absurdly good this maintenance has gotten from a simple check it and forget it perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. So we mentioned a little bit earlier, we were trying to break WSUS, right? So I wanted to recreate the idea that I have a lot of updates in WSUS and my syncs are failing, timing out. And so I had WSUS. I made sure that the indexes did not exist because that actually speeds things up and makes it pretty effective. And then I went in and I had gotten up to about 20,000 updates in the console. So relatively significant amount, right? Trying to represent historically maintaining a WSUS for a long time. And so I was hoping and expecting, I run a sync and then I check these cleanup options. And what we've seen it a lot with customers. I've seen it in my previous environments. It times out. It fails to do the cleanup. And that's because there are the stored procedures that actually get ran. They have timeouts, right? There's built-in timeouts in WSUS to prevent catastrophic failure or database locks, et cetera. And so those timeouts were occurring, but Configuration Manager in more recent versions has gotten very smart. And that cleanup actually will pick back up and retry. So I was able to blow away something like 14,000 updates over I think it took maybe over an hour or so, but it just kept churning and it blew away like 14,000 superseded or declined and expired updates that, according to my maintenance settings with no issues at all. And then it added the indexes and everything was happy. So that did not used to be the case. Even when those checkboxes first were introduced, they did still cause problems. They would time out, but it seems like they've been iterative and continuing to improve them.
Yeah, so that's been something that's been really good and really helpful for pretty much everybody just around the board across the gambit on that one. So that's one step that you can do that's pretty simple and is pretty easy. to get things set up and started off right off the bat. But what about everything else? Now, I've got SQL Management Studio open here behind the scenes, so you can probably guess where this is going. So we talked a little bit about this idea of indexes and removing things from the SQL database and this, that, and the other thing. But none of the checkboxes that are here necessarily flat out address things like SQL health, the actual health of the database. So one of the things that's very common, again, in the configuration manager world is set up SQL for configuration manager and leave SQL alone. Don't touch it. Don't look at it. Don't poke it with a stick. Don't anything to it, right? And again, we kind of come back around to that idea of, well, but maybe there's some things that we should do. So there's some pretty simple setup tasks, and we're actually going to go through here and set them up. If you've never heard of it before, it's this article by a guy named Hallengren. So actually got here.
And what makes this script or the concept of maintenance important? So if you note that checkbox, it says add the indexes. It does not say re-index the database, right? There's a very, very important difference. You can add indexes all day, but until you run an indexing operation, those indexes aren't going to be populated, right? So you can kind of think of an index as like a hash table or a mapping, a key value pair, more or less. There's a little bit more to it, but that's what it boils down to, right? It says, hey, when you're looking for A, go there, and it helps you do it quickly. But the index itself is just it's the idea. It's like, do this. Now, when you create the indexes, when you run an index of a database, it populates those. They do actually take up space in the database. So that checkbox is only half of the struggle here.
Yep. You can think of it kind of like a library system, essentially. If you've ever been to a library and you've gone and you look for things by the Dewey Decimal System or the Library of Congress or whatever like that, right? The index is the process of creating the record of where that book is supposed to be in the library, right? But then you have to have an order to that system, right? They need to be in an alphabetical order or something, so that when you go to the card catalog up there at the front, if anybody here remembers card catalogs from the public library back forever ago when we could go outside, you'd walk up, you'd pull it out, and you'd look in alphabetical order through the card index, you'd find it, and it would tell you what shelf or what location. That's exactly what this is. Well, the problem is over time, basically gremlins come in the middle of the night, grab the box of index cards, and just throw them up into the air, and then shove them all back in the box in whatever order they want. And then no one can find anything. It's the same concept as what happens here. So what Hallengren then does is actually helps rebuild those when they reach a certain percentage of being out of order, essentially. And there's a couple of different ways that you can implement it. One of the easiest ways to do it, it does require a little bit of editing after the fact if you do it, but is if you just come in here, copy this, and over here, and first things first, let's go ahead and start the SQL Server agent, because that's important to have running if we want to actually see any maintenance tasks get created.
I neglected to do that.
It happens, it's fine. When you have snapshots of the VMs in perfect condition, you never need maintenance.
That's right.
You can just go ahead and paste this right here. And this is basically, I'm not going to go through and try to explain line by line by this, because this was written by somebody that's much smarter at SQL than I am. But the general concept is it goes through all of what are called the user databases in here, which means it's going to hit all the databases on the server, including things like my ConfigMgr server and my SUSDB as well. So it's actually going to help improve performance there as well. And basically you just copy, paste it in here and click new query, and then you're done ish. When I say you're done-ish, is that you still have to come into the job activity monitor down here. And if we refresh it, actually jobs, sorry. Come on. Did it not run? Did I not click the button? I apparently didn't click the button. I apparently clicked new query and not execute. I'm blind. Hit refresh, there we go. And we can see that it's completed, and it's now created some wonderful little jobs for us here, including things like doing an integrity check on the database, doing things like re-indexing it. Now, the one thing that we still have to do here is we need to come in here and specify a schedule on how often we would like to have that run. And once that runs, if I go ahead and actually just go ahead and start it here, I'm just going to manually run it. Start job at step. That run away from us.
Yeah, so we should actually be able to go look at the indexes, actually. We can go see them, that they got created on the couple tables that it's supposed to be
Oh,
in.
yeah, sure. You have the tables written down there from...
I don't, but I could go find it real quick, and we can ramble between now and then.
Okay, I'm gonna go find the log file real quick for it redoing and rebuilding indexes while you do that then. So real quick, we're gonna go and jump on over here into our friendly neighborhood SQL install. I think it's actually installed on C, if I remember correctly, on this server. Yeah. Nope.
What's that?
But no.
What are you looking for?
I was just trying to remember which drive SQL is installed on this server, and I found it. So in a second here, assuming that I have the right instance, we should actually see some logs show up. We can go and check. There we go.
Does it log here?
Certainly do. It's supposed to, right there.
Oh, there it is, yeah.
So if we go down here and we go ahead and open that, you can open it in a text file, but that's not very fun. But what we can actually do instead is if we can find the Open With button, choose another app.
WordPad.
No. Yeah, WordPad. Absolutely. That's the app I want to open it. How'd you know? I'm actually going to choose to open it with my favorite log viewer ever. Hopefully it's near and dear to everybody's hearts in here. Good old CM Trace. What could possibly go wrong? And there we go. So you can actually see here is it's going through. And as you can see, I apparently had some database indexes that may have been a little bit fragmented, just a small bit. And if you actually go down through here, you can actually go and see which database it was, where, and why it got indexed or why it was picked up for what its fragmentation level was. And we can actually see why it got cleaned up, how it got cleaned up, in the state that it was left in.
And we can actually go through the two tables.
All right, cool. And we can go through and we could go through and look at all the different indexes it's doing. But at the end of the day, what that does for us is it increases the speed at which an update can be found. So that when the deletion process is happening, it can actually find the record and then execute the call to delete the record, which overall just makes your life better for both your clients and your server. Go ahead and pull it up if you want to chat while I'm going and finding that table.
Yeah, so with this, right, what's interesting about these indexes is initially they some admins in the community were just really tired of seeing the processing old updates and WSUS maintenance just time out all the time. And so they investigated it and they found out, like, hey, if I create this index, things get better. And it eventually it kind of made its way through, and Microsoft implemented. They sanctioned, like, hey, you can use this index, we will support it, right? And then it made it all the way up to, okay, the ConfigMan team is going to implement this in the product. So this came from the community. They found this index that would be useful and made it all the way up, which is pretty cool. And there you go. Here they actually are. Here is the indexes. They take up space. Right. Yep. Those are it. So they do take up space, actually. But yeah, it's neat. They pretty much map something in table A to something in table B. And, they speed things up quite a bit. It's at least nice to know they exist.
Yep. Yeah. Clear the filter out here real quick.
And the other one's going to look pretty much the same.
All right, so that's pretty cool and neat and awesome for SQL, but what if you didn't install WSUS on SQL? Can we just check these magical checkboxes and everything will still be A-OK?
It depends.
Depends, right? So there's a couple of special scenarios around and about these particular checkboxes here that make life a little bit better or a little bit maybe not better. And that has to do mostly with the fact of if the database is remote or if it's local to the box. If the database is remote from the box, these commands won't actually process across the network to them. That will not actually cause, or WID, or if it's a WID. If it's a remote or if it is across the network, it will not process them for it.
It will for SQL, though, as long as it has permissions.
Yeah, as long as it has permissions, it will for SQL, but not for WID, right? It needs to be widden across the network, and it will not process for these. So that's just something to keep in the back of your head. If that is the case, Mr. Cody has already put this here, and we do have these links actually in the slide deck. That's the big reason why we even bother with the slide deck. Is that I'm going to go ahead and grab that real quick and bring that up here. Is that it addresses what you can do on top of that. So for these, there's some additional special things that you might need to do in order to get that maintenance to work. And here's actually where it can call out what those are for that. It's just something that's kind of good to know and to keep in the back of your head for that.
Yeah, so what it boils down to, right, is access, and you'll actually see in the log files, if you have a remote WID, you will see that it failed to connect, right? It could not authorized, access denied, and it can't connect to the remote WID instance. So you'll know when you've got those checkboxes checked and you dig into like WSYNC-MGR log, you'll see the failures.
Yep. Yeah.
So I think we dropped 3 different links in there. So we've got 3 links. There's all kinds of information on maintenance. It's kind of funny, something we said we were never supposed to do. We now have a insane amount of information about the things we're supposed to do, and it touches on a lot of interesting things. One of them is also capacity limits, which we'll start to talk about that a little bit. Maybe not specifically around capacity, but ways to approach it when you do need more than one WSUS and some of the gotchas.
Yep.
I think,
which kind of brings us to one kind of last little thing here around that is that, and one of those links, one of the things that does get referenced that frequently gets forgotten about is that at the end of the day, all of this traffic and everything for how the clients are then accessing that data that lives in the database is all being done via website. It's all being done via IIS. If we actually hop on over here real quick, we can take a quick look-see at an application pool setting real quick here. And this is another thing that commonly kind of gets glossed over. And one of the best practices chunks in there will actually have some configuration guidance on this. Now, something to be aware of as you are flipping through here is make sure that you take a moment and read some of those settings, in particular the ones around this one, the limit percentage, as well as the private memory limit recommendations for it. Depending on situations, scenarios, and things like that, sometimes the right answer is 0. Sometimes the right answer is there really is no best practice. And sometimes the answer is do the thing that's in the documents for it. It all depends on what's happening in your environment and what other scenarios you have. And we'll cover a little bit of the who's and what's and whys and hows of those, and some things we can do about that a little bit later on when we kind of get into that multiple software update points or different things like that we can do around things like that in the future. So
yeah, for sure. And it, like you said, this is like something. It's something better than nothing here. The default IIS settings will likely trip over themselves in good time in WSUS world. If you've got a couple hundred clients, it might never become an issue. If you start to scale up thousands of clients, tens of thousands, you're going to start seeing a problem. And then you're going to start seeing all kinds of scan failures, and then you're not patching all of a sudden, and you think you're patching. So it's just really, really important to be mindful of this. It is a Windows app. It runs on IIS. It runs on SQL. Those things need to work well.
Yep. So I'm going to change venue again here real quick and stop that, and this shared back out. All right. So we will, of course, we have got all those links right here. So don't worry if you didn't happen to copy paste them out of the chat. So that'll be there and available to you. So let's talk about the many faces of WSUS. Speaking of all the different types of options and things, it's all WSUS at the end of the day. It's all software update packages at the end of the day. It's all SDP files, turtles all the way down, as somebody on our team likes to say. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean, right? Well, what are the configuration options? You'll notice that we use this word of SQL WID and SQL Express again here, right? Well, those are the common ones that we kind of just glossed over here, but there's a whole bunch of other different possible outcomes. And depending on what your organization's needs are, they might affect that. And what's kind of interesting about this is these become more important to understand because they sound super great and super easy to implement when you're just doing normal updates. But there's some other important gotchas when you get into third-party patching, like what we do a lot of, or what we see a lot of when we're talking to different people out there. So the first one here is the idea of sharing a SQL instance. So at the end of the day, you can actually have WSUS, right, the app itself, sit and share. You can have 2 instances of WSUS sharing the same SQL instance. Okay, and each of those will act as their own website. Clients will come into that website, and they'll all come back, and it will use that same SQL instance. You can also use the same content storage behind the scenes. So that means you're only downloading the content effectively once, and everybody is referencing the same location. You're not duplicating or doing anything weird or strange like that, and creating any oddities out across the scenes. And there's a couple of other things that you can do along that. You can also have hierarchies internally, right? One of the checkboxes that's actually inside of the configuration manager console, I'll show when we go back over there, is you technically can sync from 3 potential sources for your software update point inside of configuration manager. You can tell it to sync from Microsoft, you can tell it to sync from nothing, and you can tell it to sync from some other internal WSUS server as well, which gets into the concept of how you can create a hierarchy of WSUS servers internally. Maybe you have some devices that only patch with WSUS instead of patching with configuration manager and WSUS and things of that nature. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different ones, and the big thing that's kind of important here, right, is there's not going to be any one specific size fits all for pretty much any organization at all. I think Jason Sandys is probably the one that is most famous for saying the fact that there are no best practices, right? Best practices works best for your organization or something of the sort, right? And it's extremely, extremely true, right? I can sit down, I could tell you that back when I worked at an organization with 150,000, servers, I'd tell you that, yeah, I had 42 software updates and you'd look at me like I'm an absolute madman. And then I would tell you that I had fractional T lines in some locations and that I had secondary sites at those locations, so that when we bought or sold that entire entity, we just cut off that particular limb so that we didn't have to worry about trying to disentangle the infrastructure. We just cut off that secondary and all components to it. And all of a sudden it makes sense. That's why you're doing that for that absurd number of clients, for that absurd number of things. So there isn't going to be a one size fits all type scenario necessarily for anyone.
Yeah, for sure. And so there's some considerations, right, when we start to scale up. We're talking about multiple SUPs. We're talking about shared SQL instances. We're talking about shared content storage. And there's a couple things that can kind of happen to that. And that kind of leads us into our next slide here, right, where we're talking about multiple SUPs. What kind of chaos can this cause? What issues can happen and what things work well? Why do you do it? What's the point? And so the big thing to keep in mind when you have multiple software update points, if you have a shared database, then it's the best case scenario regarding if one fails, because when a client runs a Windows Update scan, which the SCCM agent will kind of kick off and zombify and use the Windows Update agent, it goes and it scans against WSUS, and as long as there is happy, healthy scan data results, and it says, yeah, that's valid, and I'm okay with it, it's a delta scan, right? It's a smaller scan. It's a smaller pull down in bandwidth. It's a smaller network or process and memory usage on the client and on the server. And for what one client fails, it's not a big deal. Like if your Windows Update scan fails on your endpoint, you don't care. No one knows. There's no impact. But the problem is when lots of them fail, then it's a domino effect. And then you eventually end up with a crippled WSUS server, or you end up failing over to other servers, right? So something we mentioned here is that a SUP failover is a hard failover. So you can configure multiple SUPs in ConfigMan. And one of the things that happens is when a certain set of error codes happens, the SUP, your client says, okay, you know what? I'm going to go look for somebody else. You're not very helpful. And it goes and it gets another software update point. Now, a lot of the components in Configuration Manager are boundary controlled. And when a resource is not available in your boundary, right, you can't use it unless there's fallback configure, etc. But with a SUP, you can continue to use that SUP no matter where you are. So if you fail over and then you go to Tijuana and you're still on that SUP that's in who knows where, you're hard tied to that SUP, right? And so you have an interest in keeping your WSUS happy, because if you start triggering full scans and if you have a large catalog, all of a sudden you've got X number of clients downloading a 300 megabyte catalog from Tijuana or to Tijuana, right? And you're going to start making some people very angry. And so that's one of the considerations that you have to be mindful of, right? There's more to it than just firing up software update points and assigning them to boundaries. It doesn't always work the way you think it does.
And one of the big commonalities on this one, or one of the big ones where this happens, right, is when we see the nuke and pave approach, right? It's almost become an internet meme at this point, of the idea of like, WSUS isn't working, I'll just nuke and pave it, right? Well, if it's the only software update point in the hierarchy, that might be fine. It might not be fine, right? Depends on what you have configured. It might not be fine in the fact that all of a sudden it's down for an hour and a half or so, and those clients were able to sit in an idle state for a long enough period that they said, no, we're going to go to Microsoft and start downloading whatever the heck we feel like at this point, right? Or if there's no group policy restricting them, or no other things restricting them or preventing them. Or it could be that they maybe there's multiple software update points, and as Cody was saying, all of a sudden they start looking for somebody else to talk to. And I think one of the big ones, I think it was EE2, wasn't it? Was the firewall error code that was missing for a long time in WMI. There was a big thing about this where if they failed over, is that trying to get them to fail back, there was a missing error code for firewall errors, essentially. So you couldn't even get them to fail back over to other things to get them to go back where they were supposed to. So if you only have one SUP, it might be fine, might not be fine. You have multiple SUPs, it probably won't be fine, because it's probably going to go talk to somebody else. And when that happens, you can start to end up with these interesting phenomenon where things start to just get pinned all over the place. So one of the big things I mentioned earlier is that it's all SDP files all the way, all the way to the bottom. It's all XML, it's all WSUS. Everything is all, things like that. One of the other things that people forget about a lot of the time is that it's also all WMI. And one of the big things with more and more companies and more people adopting these ideas of building these small virtualized thin clients that people will hop on and use, whether it's Azure, whatever, virtual machines, or a Hyper-V set of virtual machines, or Citrix, or it doesn't matter, right? We have these small, very thinly provisioned machines, or they update or whatever, is that data is all on WMI. So when these scans start happening, the real world impact, I know we're just saying, oh, these scans. Well, the real world impact of that is it starts pegging the drives on the hypervisors, because all of a sudden 500 clients all at the same time that are all sitting on the same disk all need to start a scan, or 200 all need to start a scan, or whatever all need to start a scan. And so it pegs the hypervisor. And then as a result, the host then gets hit. Well, if that storage pool is also what WSUS happens to be sitting on for a server, because it's all in the same data center or whatever like that, all of a sudden now the WSUS server is getting hit as well while it's trying to re-download a catalog or rebuild the information that it used to have. And it can't do it. So it just blows up. So a couple of the ways that you can get around that are one of the common solutions that we typically will recommend if you're going to do something like that, right, is throwing a firewall rule in place to allow the server to actually survive so that it stops getting hammered with IIS requests, and the clients will give up for a short period of time, as opposed to actually trying to continue on with the scanner, continue on with their download and things like that. So just something to be very cognizant of as you're working with things.
Yeah, for sure. And with these multiple SUPs and having shared content, right? So a shared software update point in a properly configured state, right? Shared database, and then sharing the content. Now, content is not as important, right? In a ConfigMgr managed SUP, the Microsoft updates don't use the content directory except for EULAs. If an update has a EULA, if you've ever gone through and done some of like the deployment packages and configuring updates, you probably saw a checkbox that says like, oh, download and accept EULAs, or what should I do, right? There are actually updates in config or in WSUS. They have a EULA associated with them. That EULA has to be downloaded. And if it's not downloaded, you cannot actually deploy the patch. So it's not uncommon to see people with a broken content directory for various reasons, and then they actually are not deploying those patches that had a EULA. So it's something to be mindful of. You'll see it in your log files if you pay attention that it's failing to download the EULA. But with that said, right, if you have properly configured SUP with shared content, shared database, it's your best case scenario in a failover, because yes, there is still a little bit of traffic and processing that happens. If I fail over from SUP A to SUP B, it causes a delta scan. And this is something that's in the docs regarding failover. There is still a delta scan. So it'll do a failover and it triggers like, okay, I need to go and check, right? Does that scan, but it's a lot less intense than a full scan, especially because if one of your clients failed over, there's a good chance a lot of your clients are about to fail over. So if you have a failover happen and it's not shared content, it's not shared SUSDB, you're going to see that domino effect potentially start to happen. Our whole site, thousands of clients all of a sudden hit a new server and start doing full scans, and you've got no IIS maintenance in place and no indexes in place, you're going to see WSUS die. And so you've got to be kind of aware of this, cognizant of what's going on. You've got to have preventative maintenance in place to prevent this from happening. And I think one thing too is there have been times where you may want to deliberately fail over a SUP, right? And I forget when they introduced it. It was a while back though, for sure. You can manually fail over a SUP. There's a right-click option. If we end up in a console at some point during this presentation, we can show it. You can right-click, and it's one of the client actions. Switch to next software update point.
Yep. Cool. So let's go on here. So one interesting thing that you brought up there. So one of the big things to kind of note when we're talking about with these shared SUPs, right, is how can we avoid configuration drift, right? Because one of the things that Cody kept bringing up there is making sure that we've always got these properly configuration. We keep saying that magical world of properly configured and proper configuration, right? Well, there's 4 things. We're going to kind of show these here. The first one here is kind of interesting because it's becoming more and more common, and I'm actually going to flip over into a demo screen here real quick instead while we're kind of talking about the rest of these here. I just want to see the list here before we go into these. Is the wonderful world of proxies. So we can go ahead and change some screen share here again. And this is actually a pretty recent one that we've started to see a ongoing trend in lately. That started to pop up more and more in the past couple of months here. So a lot of the times what we're starting to see organizations will do, if you come into Configuration Manager here, go to Administration, go to Servers and Sites and Roles, and go down here and you find your server, and go to good old-fashioned software update point. We right-click, look at Properties. You'll note that you have this proxy and account settings down here, okay? Now, it's not checkboxed here. It's not configured anything here because of what's configured on the primary site server at the moment. The primary site isn't set up to allow it, so this isn't actually going to let me check any of the checkboxes here. Now, what's important to note here is these settings here are per software update point role in the environment. Now, if you have 2 software update points that are sharing the same database, one of them is always considered the primary between the 2 of them. Okay, one of them will always be the one that's doing the talking out to Microsoft. The other one will always be wanting to do the behind the scenes, just servicing update of the client, ready to take over. Okay, if you only have this setting configured on one of the 2 of them, and the primary goes down during that time frame, the proxy settings will get nuked, and the content will stop properly downloading for the time until they switch back.
I love the art you've created at this point.
The drawing all around it, right? It's just kind of, it's very important to the point here, the circling of it. And it's kind of weird because everything will look like it's working except for the fact that content can't download. Everything else in WSUS will 100% look like it's working. You'll see good syncs, or you'll see one good sync, one bad sync, one good sync, one bad sync, back and forth, as it fails back and forth between the 2 of them, depending on what ports are and are not allowed when you're going through the proxy, right? Because it depends, right? If you allow going to maybe say Microsoft, but not to third-party stuff, right? You might see a kind of good sync, but not a really good sync where it's not fully getting all the content. The sync to Microsoft might work, but you can't download the rest of the content. So it's really important to make sure that if you're using them, you're checking them and you are setting the proxy settings to be the same across all of the different components and everywhere out there. Otherwise, you can end up in a weird situation for them. For that. Which brings us kind of to another relatively important one, which is the idea of certificates. And there's a very similar one here in the same world of certificates. So I know this one's very near and dear to your heart, Cody, with the number of hours that you spent troubleshooting it the first time you saw it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, this was a massive failure to read logs on our parts, though, which was kind of funny and in hindsight. But there is a really fun scenario in this one's specific to third-party patching, no matter the catalog, right? Just third-party patching in general. So there's two main certificates that you're going to have when you're dealing with WSUS. The main one is going to be the IIS cert, right? If you're configured for SSL, you're going to have a server auth cert. It's bound to IIS, and your clients have to at least trust it. They don't need to necessarily auth against it, but they have to trust it, and that's fine. But the other component is the code signing certificate, right? And I don't think we have them configured here at this time. It's super quick to do it, but we need a code signing certificate. Now, that code signing certificate it's that trust, right? It's our trust that says, hey, your environment, or at least something you trust, signed this file. So you can trust it, you can use it, and there's some reg settings to tell clients if it's self-signed, etc. There's some details to it all, but at the end of the day, it implies trust. And that trust, though, is more than just on the client side. It actually is also necessary on the server side. So what we saw in customers' environments was this weird anomaly, right? They'd come to us and they'd say, hey, all my updates are getting deleted. I can't download them. They're gone. Everything's just gone. It doesn't make any sense. And we noticed a commonality pretty quickly. Okay, you have multiple software update points. That's kind of strange, but that it's getting deleted doesn't make sense. But let's dig in. And so we would see, we pulled up Procmon. We really started to dig in. And what we saw was one of the software update points was deleting the file. It would just come through and say, hey, gone. No, I don't want you. And just blow it away. And the root cause, what it ended up eventually being was the other server, it did not trust the code signing certificate. And this actually can happen in a fully ConfigMgr managed environment too, right? So if your secondary or other WSUS servers don't trust the code signing certificate and they get passed the baton for hash validation, they will delete the file. That's how this happens. So there are a bunch of roles that WSUS has. There's a handful of them, I guess, not a bunch. And those roles, actually, there's a health check every 5 minutes that the WSUS service does. It actually runs a stored procedure in the database every 5 minutes by default. And one of those things is the role, really, that handles hash validation. And so if you're a primary WSUS, say you've got a shared SUP, SUSDB, shared content, and then your primary, maybe it's offline for 5 minutes during patching, it fails over to the secondary server. That server becomes responsible for hash validation. You don't trust the cert. Guess what? It's going to come back through the next time you publish any update, maybe it's Dell, HP, Lenovo, it doesn't matter what it is, and it's going to delete it. It's going to blow it away. It's going to be gone. And so the solution, right, is to just make sure you have consistency. You need consistently configured servers. You need to actually have your code signing cert trusted. Now, it's common to not run into this because you have that checkbox set, enable third-party updates, and then all of a sudden ConfigMgn's magically managing your certificate, and then you happen to have your other WSUS server in a collection that's targeted, right? It says, oh yeah, okay, it's got the enable third-party updates client settings, it's going to get that code signing certificate, it's going to trust it, and then everything works. But on the flip side, we see this because there's plenty of customers that don't target their servers with the client policy that says enable third-party updates. So Justin's chatting, he's throwing me off. Jordan has this article pulled up, and we detailed this pretty extensively, right? We show you some of those queries you can pull up to go and look at what is the NLB front-end master server, right? So you used to be able to, and you still can, just don't do it. You can configure WSUS in a network load balanced way. It's not really any way, shape, or form needed, but that language is still in the database. That NLB front-end master is still in use. And so when that NLB front-end master moves, you don't trust it, bad things happen.
Yep. And all this just goes back to the whole, you have to make sure that everything matches all the time if you're going to do multiple SUPs, sharing the content and sharing the information from that perspective.
Yeah, for sure.
I think we've got maybe time for one more thing. Do we want to show, if we're allowed to have a few more minutes here, I think we can show one more thing. We can show one last little gotcha that's kind of interesting that started, I want to say it was in server 2016 or 2019, that started being a thing, which is in the instance that you've said, you know what, enough's enough. I'm done. I'm deleting WSUS. I'm getting rid of it. I want to rebuild it for forever. Revert a snapshot here real quick.
Yeah, I didn't even know this was a thing. He's like, yeah, that bug. And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And then he showed me the thing.
Fine.
Actually pretty neat. Problematic.
Basically, if you didn't know, starting in the server 2016, 2019, there's been a recurring theme in our conversation here of it's all such and such. Well, it's all PowerShell now. So things like server manager and server role, when you're installing roles, when you want to install a new role and everything like that, it's all PowerShell at the end of the day. If you actually go into Windows Admin Center, if you go and you look at those different pieces and parts, it's all just running a pre-configured PowerShell script with variables behind the scenes. So if we actually go over here and give me 1 second to reshare out now that this snapshot is done applying. Window. Oh, desktop manager. It's thinking about its life. All right. So I have a server here. You'll notice it's the same server that we were just on. And if we go into Server Manager, you can see that I have, in fact, what?
We spend time breaking things. It's actually sometimes very difficult to break something in a very specific way.
Yep. But yeah, so if you take a quick look here, you can see that I've clearly had enough. I've deleted WSUS, and I would now like to restart, because we were talking about the scenario earlier, where maybe you just have had enough and something's really broken, and so reinstalling it is the way forward for whatever reason, right? So to that end, let's go ahead and get WSUS reinstalled. You can see it's gone. IIS is still here, but nothing else is. Let's go ahead and click Add a Feature. We'll go Next. Go Next. Go Next. Scroll down to the bottom and check Windows Server Update Services, and sure, you can have all the features. Go Next. And Next. Next. Uncheck WID. Check SQL, because, why not? And go ahead and do, what is it, J? I think it's J on these guys. Yeah, JWSUS. Teams, go away. J:\WSUS. That seems reasonable. Now, you'll notice that the next button is grayed out here, right? And up here it says specify an existing database to install it. Okay, please check the connection to validate the server connection. Well, the default is this. The language on this was a little different in 16. But just click check connection. Hey, successfully connected to the server. Everything's great. You can now click the next button. Next. Install. It's going to go ahead and it's going to go and install WSUS. Everything seems a-okay. Right, we're just going to kind of continue along here for a second.
And there's a few kind of weird issues like this that we run into, right? And some of them affect only third-party updating. Some of them affect WSUS in general. And it's kind of interesting, with WSUS, there's like a finite number of things that can go wrong. I'd say we've really pinpointed quite a few of them over the years now, and which makes it kind of interesting. We get very kind of like we perk up when we see something new. So I thought we saw all the problems. You've broken WSUS in a new way. I'm amazed. I give you applause.
I've been graced by a dog. I mentioned I have 4 dogs. I just had my youngest small furry creature appear down here. Hello. Apparently she wants to say hi. This is the youngest of the shadow gremlins, the German Shepherd who's trying to eat my face. Hello. Would you like to sing? All right, so it just finished installing. So we're going to go ahead and say close on that. And if we click on the wonderful notifications here, we'll notice that we have this post thing here, which if you've ever worked with WSUS at all, at some point or another, you've without a doubt run into the post install actions or the post util tool that exists within Configuration Manager, or not within Configuration Manager, within WSUS and the tools folder. I'm going to go ahead and click on the launch post install task because clearly I need to do so to finish configuring it, and now it's very angry with me. So if you actually go here, this will actually, if we click in on this, we actually go look at the flags and go to the task details. It'll give us a log file. We can go look at this log file down here. What we'll notice, as we go look at C users app data. Temp. And this one, I'll just edit this with Notepad. It's fine, right? And so what we'll notice here is that it's missing the value of the instance name. A required configuration value was not found in the system when it actually goes to actually do the post install action. So it's not able to successfully configure it. So how do we fix it at this point? Well, the way to fix it is with our good friend PowerShell in much the same way that you would go about fixing just about any of the other things for that. Over here to PowerShell. Head on over into program files. Head on over into update. Or update services, and then tools. And we'll find our good friend WSUS util. Well, at least my good friend WSUS util. Space and help. And we'll find that we can go ahead and take a look at the post install commands for it, which is this right here. Because effectively that's all it's running at the end of the day, is this running WSUS util.exe space post install. And if we want, we can actually do help post install to get the entirety of it, at which point it will then give us the different options. Now, what's important to know about this here is this is when you run a post install command, it's effectively running some reinstallation pieces here, and it will make changes to the registry. It will make changes to things inside of the database and everything like that as it's going through this. There's another interesting feature involving IIS and some other things like that that can happen depending on how you do it, when you move content, this, that, the other thing with how network shares are as well. But anyways, all that being said, if we just put in good old post install, and then if we were to put in our SQL Server's instance name and the content path, we would get to go to where we want. So if I just do SQL underscore instance underscore name equals O 6 dot. Yes, FQDN matters. That's another one where if you don't use FQDN, it will also do the same thing, the same behavior. If you don't use FQDN in that field, if you just use normal, the short name, it also does the same behavior. And then, of course, if we go over to content-dir equals j:/WSUS. And this will then go ahead and actually run the post install the way we wanted it to. Now, if we'd gone over here into the registry, we might be able to still catch it before it actually makes the changes here. But if you actually go into the registry and if you look down in here in the wonderful world of Microsoft, update services, server, and setup.
Caught it
before it happened. You'll note that even though I checked the SQL option when I was going through there, because I didn't click, I just hit check name, I didn't actually put in a name, it actually piped in the with variable option instead, which is the other half of why the post install component is not working. So this is now going to work. It will go through here and it will fix that. And in a moment or two here, we will actually see that finish up. But I think at that point, that's pretty much kind of sort of the end of what we had to show. So if there's any questions about any weird things in WSUS that people have seen or anything like that, or time, I think we left a little bit of time left. I think we've got a few minutes left here. Any questions that anybody has or weird things like that? Curiosity things.
It's tough. You don't find a lot of people that have interest in WSUS.
What are we, the exception to the rules here? All right, so we had a question from John Tracy. Is there a way to import catalog updates into WSUS without using IE through the WSUS MMC console? Example, I recently had to import the .NET Framework 4.8 upgrade for Windows Server 2019. That one is catalog exclusive. Interesting.
I want to say you can use PowerShell to import updates. It's part of the commandments. I think. Could be wrong though.
I feel like it would be one of the .NET. I feel like you'd need to make an object for it though. Yeah.
Yeah. I've not tried, John, to be honest with you. I've done exactly what you just said.
And I guess you could probably figure out something with SCUP as well. Yeah.
If you really needed to,
you really
make
need
your
to.
own.
Yeah, you could always use SCUP. I mean.
So, Matthew, with your question, you don't want to edit it manually. And the reason you don't want to edit it manually is because some of those fields also get updated in the database as well.
Yep.
And if you have a mismatch between the database and the registry, that's why you end up you get various errors. There's a bunch of errors that can occur when content doesn't match between the two of them, or the if the instance isn't correct. So generally, you'd want to use the WSUS util to perform those changes. That's going to be the best case scenario. Now, we did try to make the server manager kind of post-install tasks run by editing the registry, but that's not even what it references. It generates like an XML file that it stores that you'd have to go manipulate. So yeah. What's the impact? Yes, if you enable, yes, it will.
Oh, so man, those scanning will for sure impact it.
So
although we did try to break WSUS by enabling all the drivers and didn't.
Yes, we did. So if you enable driver updates in WSUS, will the Windows Update client scan against all of those drivers? What kind of impact would that be? And will the client scan them if they are not approved? So yes. So here's something really important to know. This isn't even just to do with drivers. In general, every single update in WSUS that is not declined or gone, right, deleted. So if it's not declined, including if it's superseded, so superseded updates 2 will be scanned against. So the larger your WSUS catalog, the worse it's going to be for your clients. And that includes, right, these Dell and Lenovo catalogs. We did a vSmug, Andrew Jimenez and I think Justin did a vSmug presentation on Dell drivers, did a presentation on third-party update catalogs. So the Dell drivers, in particular, you can go view the applicability rules for them. They have very complex. They'll have 20 or 30 WMI queries on a single update. And what that ends up, you'll see the WMI service on your endpoints get pinned. You'll see 99% CPU usage when your client is just churning through 5,000 Dell updates evaluating applicability rules, right? So it's not to say don't use them. It's just that you need to use them carefully and then make sure you have a well-maintained environment, right? You need to have only the necessary updates that are going to be out there, and then you need a well-performing IIS configuration. So definitely, you need to minimize the number of updates you have. They're going to scan against everything. Approved and not approved in ConfigMan world doesn't matter. We don't care, right? And that's some of the don't touch WSUS that existed, actually. Right? Yeah. Don't approve updates. Don't not approve updates. Don't create computer groupings, right? You don't need to do that stuff in WSUS. And that's still true, right? Don't touch WSUS don't do that. But there are other things that need to be done, and it will impact your performance. And Jake alludes to the V3 catalog. So the catalogs for these drivers have gotten better. They started categorizing the updates, right? So, and the way they do categories for the drivers is by model generally, or submodel. So you can say, okay, I want the whatever Lenovo T480p drivers, and it helps.
So Matthew has a question. Do you recommend declining objects in Windows 10 servicing updates that aren't used? I recommend declining basically anything that you're not going to use, just in general. If you're not going to use it, you should probably decline it. Something I was going to call out that Cody started to mention there is the fact of what updates do or don't get scanned against, right? So ConfigMgr and WSUS have mostly the same language when it comes to how it classifies an update and what its state is from a readiness perspective to go out, okay? There's the blue arrow, which is the metadata only. The green, which is that, hey, I have full content, I'm ready to deploy. There's the yellow star, which means the update is superseded. There's the black X, which means the update has been expired. And then there is the red one, which means I'm missing content. WSUS uses very similar ones, but there's a couple of key differentiations there. The expired indicator, right, does not necessarily, unless you've configured the certain options for it, does not necessarily mean that it is declined. It simply means that ConfigMgr isn't going to pull the data across into the WSUS instance anymore from that perspective. Okay, in 7 days, it will tombstone the record out, essentially. As long as those updates are still classified as superseded and exist inside of the database, and actually, Cody, I think you found this recently when you were testing something. You saw it happen. You actually saw it happen, was where if the update is superseded but is older than the month timeline, so I'll actually pull it up here real quick. If it is older than the timeline, but is in a superseded state, the update will not be pulled in, but it will still exist in WSUS and get scanned against. So that's the important differentiation is it still gets scanned against, even if you're not necessarily pulling it over into ConfigMgr.
Yeah, this was an interesting one. So I've seen the setting. I generally knew what it did, but this one caught me by surprise. So not only does this kind of handle, when should we in the supersedence rules here, right? You can go and set so do not expire. So this does handle exactly what it says. It handles the expiration of updates. But what's even more interesting is it actually handles syncing them in. So I had 20,000 plus updates in WSUS, but I had this set to 3 months. And when I did my syncs between ConfigMan and WSUS, you'd see the log lines that says, hey, I'm ignoring this, it's superseded. And it had been superseded at least 3 months prior to the superseding update. So they didn't even get pulled into ConfigMan. It made my sync shorter. And then I bumped it up to 99. And then all of a sudden, all of my, well, actually still not all. No, is there? Yeah, there's actually updates that have probably been superseded for more than 99 months, I would think. But it brought in the large majority of my updates, right? And so kind of an interesting tidbit here where you're bringing in less into ConfigMan. But like Jordan said, though, they still get scanned against. They are in WSUS. They are not declined unless you do something about it. They're going to get scanned against until they're gone. And that's when these come to play.
Yep, unless you have this set up and checked. Yep. Cool.
Yeah,
that was a really good question. It's a really good question and a really good thing to understand too. It's just how does supersedence work and what are the icons and what are the pieces in that data really mean?
Yeah,
any other questions? Go ahead, Cody. Sorry.
No, that's pretty much it. I don't know. We can ramble on almost forever, but
certainly a while.
Yeah. Awesome. We try to make WSUS interesting. It's not hard. It's not easy, but someone's got to do it.
Exactly.
Okay, Frank, do we want to do maybe the raffle now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we can do that. Thanks, guys. First, thank you guys for the session there. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then, yeah,
okay.
Sounds good to me.
Perfect.
I think.
Weird. I got kicked out. Do you hear me now?
I was just gonna say he was about to do it and he dropped.
Cool. Okay. All right. So first of all, in the chat window, I'm just going to paste kind of the terms of service just because the value of the raffle, just our legal makes this to this. So just be aware if you enter the contest, just be familiar with those terms. Something that will be you'll need to accept it before getting the ticket if you win. Other thing, just be aware the event. It's just be aware if you're international on the call today. There's probably a good chance that at least for most countries you may not potentially be able to fly into the U.S. So just be aware of where you're at. Second, if you're already attending, like maybe you're a speaker or something like that, please don't enter because these are non-transferable. So if you win, it would just be you able to book it. So I'm going to go ahead and paste in the link that we have for the randomization for the code. So if you want to enter, you should be able to click that website. Just let us know if you have any issues getting in. Sometimes it seems when we do raffles, we have sometimes we've taken down this Swagit site. So if that happens, hopefully we can have a backup here, but it looks like things are working pretty well here.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll give it maybe a minute before I click start draw, and then we'll go from there.
Nice. So yeah, guys, check the chat. He pasted in the link for the Swagit. Go in there and join for the drawing here. Don't miss out on a chance to grab that. So
yeah, so just for context, this will be for the MOA conference in October. Just a really great event, just, really focused around system management. I'll include the link for the session for the event in the chat window as well. So whoever wins, they'll get a full ticket to the event, which includes hotel for 4 nights. And we'll have a code for the winner where you go and when you actually register, you'll just be able to enter the code, which would be the option, which would include the hotel as well.
Pretty amazing.
Cool. We'll give it maybe maybe 10 to 15 more seconds. Looks like there hasn't been anybody entering lately. So there's only 20 people so far. So 5% chance right here. So this is pretty high compared to a lot of these.
Yeah, and I
this
see
is
60
super good
people on the
odds.
call, so there's don't miss out if you guys are. I know there's probably some that can't enter, but
All right, so we'll do 3, 2, 1, and then we'll start it.
look at this. Suspenseful. Nice. Congratulations, Daniel Saltzman.
All right, so Daniel, you should be able to get a screenshot of
Yes.
your end, the winner. So just email that to me. I just put my email in the chat, and
Wow,
we'll go
okay.
through and get you the code.
Awesome. It's amazing.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Don't forget to stop at the Patch My PC booth.
Yes, absolutely. Wow. That's wonderful.
Cool. All right, back to you, Frank. I think you have
Very
just
cool.
kind of open session.
Yeah.
Excellent.
So thanks again to our friends at Patch My PC for coming in and sponsoring our session this month. Very much appreciate you guys as always. So for the group, one thing I just wanted to touch on quick is 2107. So 2107 of ConfigMgr current branch was just recently released. And really a couple of brief call outs I wanted to make. It's mostly on some prereq changes. So we changed the requirements for .NET Framework to 4.6.2 and ultimately 4.8. So you'll start seeing that in your prereq checker. If you haven't already started looking at that, start looking at upgrading your version of .NET. The client is now requiring a newer version of the Visual C++ redistributables. So be on the lookout for that. And there's a new prereq check to identify infrastructures that are still using SQL Server 2012. There's about a year left, I think just under a year, maybe 10 months now left of support for SQL Server 2012. So if you're still running that, start making your migration plans to move away from it and get on to something more current. And then lastly, I think this came with the last version, but I'm going to mention it now, the HTTPS or enhanced HTTP requirement. I believe this was 2103, but like I said, I'm going to mention it now because it's a big deal. Not a big deal, but something important for your environment. Sorry, I just accidentally muted my headset. Still, it's a big deal if you're running HTTP in your environment still. The enhanced HTTP option will be supported, so that's sort of the simplified path away from HTTP. But the recommended and best practice moving forward is going to be HTTPS, PKI certs, and all that. So definitely, if you're not already thinking about those things, the HTTPS requirement goes into effect with the 2111 release, so late next year. So we still have a little bit over a year to get to that point, but never too early to start planning for that. So let's see. Yep, thank you. Yep, certs, client comms. It's 2111, not 2107. Well, that's what they said in the doc, that it'll be 2111. It'll be, well, it actually says the release that comes after November of 2021 is how it was phrased. Yep, and yes, .NET 4.8 is all site servers. Just had a customer actually. It's just a warning right now. It's not a hard blocker for the .NET stuff, but it is something to keep in mind. So, but yes, it was all site servers. They had a remote server that it kept coming up on, and then when they reached out, they let them know that it was all site servers and not just the primaries. So, any questions on any of those things, or any questions on any of the 2107 stuff that's come out? I know I didn't talk much about any of the actual feature releases in here, but Okay. Well, what I'd like to do is open it up to the group. We've got a large group on today. So we've got quite a few peers on the call and a bunch of experts on the call. So if there's anything anybody wanted to ask about, things you're dealing with, things you're looking at that you're not quite sure, hop off mute, throw it in the chat, whatever you feel most comfortable doing. But I would love to see some open forum here and seeing us helping each other in the community. So if there's anything that anybody has, now it would be a great time for that. Can be anything. Small, doesn't have to be something huge.
I think one thing you said actually is kind of interesting. So it's something that's called out in the docs, but you always hear a little bit of mix back and forth. So HTTPS via PKI is the official recommended solution, right? And not now eHTTP is supposed to make it easier for people, but at the end of the day, right, that doesn't encrypt everything. There are actually still things that don't get encrypted. It just encrypts the most important things. But PKI is still the recommendation then?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know. The docs kind of say it, but you still hear people say, yeah, just do HTTP. It's easy. Just check the box. But at the end of the day, right, I mean, it's better to have your own PKI infrastructure and to be able to revoke those certificates easily.
Exactly. Yeah, you get more control, right? Like of everything. Like you said, we can revoke certificates. There's just more control in it. And so ultimately, that's the recommended path. But you're exactly right that the path of least resistance is just checking the box for eHTTP.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think we're going to see a lot of customers make a frantic transition when that date starts coming around to just check the box and move. But long term, hopefully, we'll start seeing everybody moving to HTTPS. But yes, good question.
This is Timothy. I've got a SQL question. At what point would someone recommend for ConfigMgr having a SQL instance that is not on the primary site server?
When you say at what point, do you mean at like what size environment?
Right, yeah, say like I would say number of endpoints would be probably the primary gauge, but also if there was any other realized benefits from having it on its own separate instance.
I don't know that we have any specific guidance that will say, once you hit, let's say 50,000 devices, that it will, that's the number that you're going to want to move it over, right? So the big thing is number one, someone just put it in the chat too, is sizing it correctly. They asked, how much RAM you got. So that's the big question, right? Is, as long as we're sizing things appropriately. But then someone also did just make a really good point about the high availability. So to get true HA, the database cannot coexist on the site server. So that's always something to consider. Go ahead.
Can't it now, though? There was a bug, but now you can host the database on an availability group, right, and do HA servers, HA SQL across 2 site servers, I think. There was a bug at one point that didn't allow it because of a prereq check, but I think it got fixed.
Yeah, the prereq check, I think, got fixed at least. I don't know if that made it fixed, though.
So I think you can do an availability group with a primary, secondary node on your 2 site servers and do HA local to your site servers.
Okay. Yeah, that I didn't know.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's an interesting thing, right? Because Justin's putting it in the chat here, right? There's technically documentation for it, but I can assure you that if you go to certain conferences and talk to people, that there are absolutely people running above those numbers and running below those numbers all over the place. It all comes down to SQL. How much RAM can you throw at it? How much CPU can you throw at it? How much resources can you throw at it? For sure.
It's a good question in the chat.
Gotcha. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Is this the link that you just pay? Oh, so you just pasted it up to 100,000 clients. SQL Server is remote from the site server computer.
Yeah, because this used to be a big deal behind the CASs, right? This document originally was one of the big reasons why you would always be like, no, why are you building a CAS? You don't have 100,000 clients, right? As well as, the whole concept of SQL Server being on box or off box. Because I think this one actually has the CAS stuff in here too, doesn't it, Justin? Let me see if this one has the CAS.
Yeah,
You're too quick at posting it.
Yeah, I think that doc was only specific to if you're in a CAS, like a primary in a CAS. That's where I guess remote support's more. I don't think that applies. I think it's still 100K if you're in a primary site that's standalone. So I don't think the co-located versus not in standalone. As far as I know, I don't think the numbers change in that scenario, only if it's in a hierarchy based on that doc.
Did see, I don't want to get lost. Yeah, so there's one around client push. So will that ensure that the client gets installed? It's like yes, but with huge air quotes, right? So there's a doc on Microsoft's site that talks about all the prereqs for client push. So yes, it totally will try. Now you can see there's at least one thing at the bottom. Don't install it on domain controllers. Don't install it on site system servers. But you've got to be careful with client push, especially if you allow fallback to NTLM. That's technically a threat vector. It's something to keep in mind. And then it's only going to try to do site-wide client installation if it has discovered those objects, right? So if you enable site-wide client push like you have here, and then you don't have network discovery, AD discovery, or any discovery at all enabled, you're not going to see a whole lot of things happen. So you need to discover them. For that to work, you need credentials, you need authentication, you need to be able to actually get to those, right? So there's an accounts tab there that you have to configure. And then on top of that, there's a log file, ccm.log. It's in the installation directory, the log directory for all things ConfigMan for the site server. That'll show you all of those attempts to reach out to the servers. You can have multiple accounts configured. You can also have no accounts configured. So if you have no accounts configured, it's actually an interesting idea because if you don't have a client push install account set up, it uses the site system server account, which is the computer account, which has a randomly changing password that nobody knows because it's the computer account password. So it's actually kind of an interesting idea to use your site server as your client push account. But if you're seeing that it's not hitting all your systems, right, there's a lot of factors. You've got firewall rules and RPC being enabled and SMB being enabled and open to be able to do all the things it needs to do. What checkboxes do you have checked, right? Did that happen to be a site system server? Are you not setting it for servers? Do you have the fallback to NTLM enabled or disabled? Are you blocking NTLM and Kerberos is failing? There's just little bits and pieces. The ccm.log is going to help. Commonly, I see recommended, maybe, I think actually Justin just did a video that covers client installation pretty extensively. I think we could probably drop it in the chat if he hasn't already while I'm rambling.
He did.
Yeah, so there's other ways to deploy the client. This is a way. I personally recommend against it, to be perfectly honest with you, because you can totally exploit this. It has risks, but I'm not a consultant. I'm not going to come here and say don't do that, but it's my recommendation. Use some of the alternatives.
Yeah, the client pushes a lot of interesting pros and cons too. So you scale up and scale down. One, just from a security thing, it's a spooky thing because typically you're going to end up with at least one account in there that's going to basically have access to or likely has access to way more than what it probably should, right? And then you end up with an account that probably doesn't have its password changing very often that somebody could grab, and it's going to have local admin on everything. And the second that gets grabbed, that's no bueno. And I definitely would. You already covered the NTLM thing. The NTLM thing, I would recommend unchecking that.
Yeah, I think the other thing around client push is if you have automatic enabled, just be aware like that won't automatically push unless they're in a boundary group that has site assignment too. So if you're seeing some clients not push, which I think is part of your initial question, might want to check whether or not it's being assigned to the site via you can go and look at like the client or the devices and see if the site code is being populated. If it's not, you probably just don't have a boundary group set for site assignment, which would cause the automatic push never to even attempt, not even counting things like the prerequisites like firewalls, which were mentioned.
Well, one other thing too there, and unless this has changed, I haven't checked it in a minute, the other thing is it doesn't necessarily download from distribution points. So if you're in an environment that has a lot of distribution points and only a couple of management points, and maybe you have an absurd number. If you use the right-click client push of the automatic, the content is pulled from the management point, not necessarily the closest distribution point. So if your management points are going over a big WAN as opposed to looking to download for the content locally, it's going to want to pull it from the MP because MP is always going to have newest content for it. So just something to be aware of. That's kind of in the can cause high network traffic piece there. I know that Justin had, but that's why that can cause that high network traffic.
There was one other that slid by there. Golden rule for how many SUPs?
Wait, before you get to that really quick, I want to go back to that SQL question about when to move to a remote SQL database. So the article that Justin pasted in is old. So that's guidance from 2012 R2 and all that. So our new documentation talks about you can have a I just want to clarify it. You can have a standalone primary site on a co-located database with 150,000 clients. There's not a hard rule that says at 100,000 you have to move it, but it is recommended that when your environment starts getting bigger, because of the high I/O requirements, to start moving things, and then you want to start looking at that remote SQL database. So I'm going to paste in the new recommended hardware doc, just so you guys have that one as well. So I just wanted to go back to that quickly. But yes, we can now go on to the next question, which I saw was, is there a golden rule for how many software update points you should have?
I would say give the Jason Sandy's answer on that one. Of it really depends on your environment, right? I mean, if you have 100 clients, right? Okay, one software update point's probably fine, or maybe just use WFB, right? Maybe that's good enough for you, right? The other question too is do you really need software update points? I don't know. That's another half of that question to look at as well. Maybe the correct answer, depending on what you're actually servicing, is 0. Maybe I want no software update points. I only want to push updates via Windows Update for Business or something like that. That's totally a viable option as well. In general, I think the docs, say 10,000, devices. Is it 10,000 or 5,000 devices?
No, it's crazy high.
Is it crazy high?
The software update point can support up to 25,000. 25,000 when running the software update
SQL,
point server,
right?
On the site system. Yes.
Yeah.
So 25K if it's hosted coexisting with another site system role, maybe it's on a DP, MP, or the site server. And then it says a standalone SUP/WSUS can handle 150,000 clients if WSUS meets requirements.
Right.
That's right. We
Which
looked
is
at
a
that recently.
Staggering number.
It's huge. Yeah.
The other thing though that goes with that too though, is remember we were talking about the different types of databases, is the size limitations of the different types of SQL, right? So as you kind of expand out into where you want to put a software update point, maybe it's not on the primary, maybe it's on some other server, and maybe you decide to install SQL Express on that server. Just be aware that there are size limitations for how big that database can get, along with those lines too.
Yeah, I think SQL Express is 10 gigabytes, something we just kind of were talking about the other day. So you might be tempted. You're like, oh, SQL Express, that's got to be better than WID, right? But once your database reaches 10 gigs, it's going to just keel over and die. I just dropped the link for the size and scale for the SUP role.
I feel like they just changed that recently too.
You can check the GitHub commits. I don't know.
I feel like it used to be lower for some reason, or maybe it was the MP roles that were lower. I don't remember.
Let's see. So next question going, I see Jim here. It's a loaded question. My current environment, 2012 R2 and SQL Server 2014, same box, planning to upgrade. Wondering what is going to be the easiest way to upgrade. When you say you're planning to upgrade, Jim, are you talking you're planning to upgrade the server OS or 2012 R2?
Yeah, I wanted to upgrade the server OS and the SQL server, since I know the SQL server is probably going to be not supported here before too long anyway. So I wanted to do them both.
Okay. You do have. Go ahead.
Yeah, in the past, I think the last 2 times before I was at the company, they literally stood up a brand new primary site, new site code, and migrated everything, and that seems like both insanity and overkill to me. So I knew there has to be a better way.
Yeah. There's a couple of things you can do. So we do support the in-place upgrade of the OS now. That's fairly recent, probably. It's been a couple of years now that they started supporting primary site in-place upgrade for server OS. The SQL Server upgrade, I've done several in the past with customers, and they're honestly usually pretty benign. So that piece of it, I wouldn't be too worried about. Obviously just planning and timing for those kind of things. But then the site server upgrade, or the site server OS upgrade, one thing that I've been telling a lot of customers, unfortunately doesn't apply for you, is to take advantage of the HA option, do a failover, and you have a pseudo server OS upgrade done for you, just failing over to the other box. But because your database is co-located, you have to move everything then.
Yeah, I was wondering if it would be worth it to even go down the road of setting up the HA and failing over, but I wasn't, because I had heard in the past that doing the in-place upgrade for the ConfigMgr site server wasn't exactly a great idea. But if
I certainly don't love it
now. Yeah, I don't either. I don't mind.
Yeah,
doing
it is supported,
simple
but
systems.
I still don't.
This one's kind of
right. And yeah, that's the thing. It is fully supported, but it's still not something that I love. But Jordan just posted in the other option, which I think you just mentioned as well. You can do a full site recovery. So basically go through essentially what would be a failover procedure. So basically it's in-place upgrade, HA failover. Those are really your options to upgrade your site server OS, unless someone can rattle off another one. Excuse me, that I'm missing.
Yeah, the only good thing about my environment is I only have one server. We're using Adaptiva One Site for a lot of the content replication, so I don't have distribution points. It's literally just one server. It's got all the roles on it, but it's just one server.
Right.
I did just put a link. It's a little bit of an older article, but the process hasn't changed, so it doesn't really matter. From Jason Sandys, where he talks about that backup and restore scenario where you stand up another server with the exact same name, well, you don't have to do the same drive structure, but I'd recommend it. And then, you can just stand up a new box, use the same name, and then do a site recovery. That goes pretty well too. I've had some good luck with that, but it's got some to-knows that are listed in that article.
Yeah, definitely. The one other thing I would definitely look at is make sure if it is a 2012 R2 server that it's not an upgraded 2012 R2 server, that it didn't follow any of the paths on that, because it can get weird and sticky with that. Also want to be really careful that your WMI health is good before you try to do an in-place upgrade. In-place upgrades usually work most of the time. They're fine. But when they don't, they go super, super bad, usually. There's not much of an in-between. They usually work. I would say I don't think I've ever had one that truly failed or failed to a non-fixable necessarily state, but I've heard some horror stories about it for the most part.
So snapshots are my friend in this scenario, is what you're telling me.
If you shut the server off first, that's the key thing. Okay. So snapshots when they're cold is the big important thing, because snapshots when they're hot, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong here, but hot snapshots still are not fully technically supported if the SQL instance is on the same box, because it's a difference in between the moments for it.
Yeah, I normally won't snapshot it ever when I'm doing any other type of upgrade because of issues like that.
And one thing to keep in mind, right, is if you are doing the backup that you should be doing of your content and your database and such, realistically, right, your server should be able to get wiped off the face of the earth, and you can restore to whatever OS you want with the same name, right? That's something to keep in mind. You can do that at any time. The tooling is there. The recovery is fully capable of doing that.
That's the way I personally prefer to do it on the ones that I've done, just because I like starting with clean, fresh servers, because you never know what things have lived inside of that server before unless you owned the server beforehand. But yeah.
Yeah. No, I get it. Yeah, this was stood up as a fresh 2012 R2, so that part doesn't worry me. So looks like I had a couple scenarios to test in my QA environment. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, someone did just chime in. Easy thing to do, say upgrade Uninstall WSUS. Yeah, that is something I should point out to you, Jim. If you do the server OS, WSUS has to get removed. It's in the documentation. Here, I'll find that really quick and paste that in the chat. But because that is documented, that WSUS has to be removed first before you do the server OS upgrade. So.
Yeah. One other interesting thing to point out, since you were talking about WSUS, just pasted an article. If you do an in-place upgrade from anything prior to 2019, Windows Server to 2019 or newer, any third-party updates, the categories will be duplicated because WSUS changed the way that they create the hash for each category from SHA-1 to SHA-2. So basically, if you're doing third-party updates, Dell, Patch My PC, really anything, when new updates are published after the upgrade happens, there will be a duplicate category that gets created in WSUS for that new product. And if you don't know that and you don't go enable that in your software update point, there's a good chance new updates published after that in-place upgrade won't automatically sync into ConfigMgr. So we actually get a ton of support cases for people that do this and they aren't aware of that scenario.
Thank you.
Let's see. Good discussion so far, guys. I'm very happy with all the questions so far. So thank you. Keep them coming though. Clearly have some experts on the line here that can help answer.
That's why we're here, Frank, to make you happy.
Thank you, Chris.
I know nothing.
Well, this is just exactly what I was hoping for, was discussion and people asking questions about things they're doing and getting answers. So who's ready to get into Intune? Me. Mecum does work really well. Intune does as well, and it's there's a lot of benefits to making the move. So for our next user group meeting, that's what we'll try to focus on, is a lot of the cloud management stuff. Yes, if you have 2,500 apps.
You can migrate your apps to Intune. It's totally a thing. Or do co-management.
You can also co-manage them and still get all your apps from ConfigMan and deploy apps from Intune.
There you go.
So that's an interesting point to make, right? Because it's a little deceiving. If you do co-management, there's the sliders, right, which are great, love it. But it's deceiving because you take the client app slider and you move it over to Pilot Intune, or you move it to Intune. But that client app slider in particular is different than the rest of them, because that slider lets you do both, right? The rest of them don't. But client apps lets you get updates from ConfigMan, or apps, sorry. The client apps one lets you get applications from ConfigMan and from Intune, and that's different than the rest of them. So it's a good thing to note. And you can actually also make them appear in company portal, so you can still have a single point of service for your end users, but have apps come from both sides.
Yep.
Isn't there another slider in there as well that lets you do both, Mr. Cody?
Oh, yeah, I guess that's true. Updates. You can technically do it with updates. That's fair.
Software updates does it too.
Third-party updates specifically.
For third-party updates specifically, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the weird ones that a lot of the times happens is dual scan. Yeah, so if you enable the slider over to it, you can actually enable dual scan. You can get your Microsoft updates all through your beautiful Windows updates for business, your Whoopee Joy, happy days, and then you can get your third-party updates for anything else via good old ConfigMgr if you want to.
Yep. And that was all customer feedback driven, as I recall, because initially when those sliders came out, it was one or the other. But a lot of customer feedback was we want to do both still. So.
And I thought I heard something recently about cloud management gateways being deprecated in the near future or something like that. Is that no longer needed or something, or I misread?
Yeah, I haven't heard that. They're changed. I mean, they just added some new functionality in 2107 for the scaling and stuff. So I have not heard anything about CMG
Maybe I'm confusing
going
it
away.
with Cloud DPs or something.
Cloud DP was just officially, I think, deprecated, and it's no longer a thing. But like the actual term Cloud DP, there are still Cloud DPs, but they're just part of the CMG now. So, but yes, you are correct there. That's probably what you're thinking of. Is the Cloud DP, I think, in this last release was officially killed off. Oh, maybe that's what it is too, Matt. The classic version of CMG. Yeah, but no, I haven't heard CMG specifically, the service moving away. So gaining momentum.
Looks like there's
what
still
else?
a cloud DP node in 2107 though.
Well, when
is there?
when I rebuilt my environment at the beginning of August, we used 2103 because 2107 was still like early opt-in, I think. It actually offered me the option to build a new CAS, and I'm like, what? I thought they took that away.
Huh.
I don't have a CAS. We just got a single primary, but it offered me the option to build a CAS right off the bat. That was just really weird.
They're still supported and still
It's still
fully,
supported.
they have use cases. It's just that they introduced the idea of a CAS collapse, right? So they're letting people, relitigate their sins of the past and remove their CAS if they don't actually need it, because there's some very niche use cases for it. Valid, but there was a lot of people who ended up with a CAS that did not need it, and until recently you couldn't get rid of it.
The story I always heard about the CAS was one of the ways that it got created was like it was in the textbook at one point. It's like drawn in the picture, and so all the consultants were like, "Yes, this is the way you need to do it." When realistically, it was really designed for companies that spanned global coverage zones that needed maybe this primary to be in a different language and to have everybody being reporting this, that, and the other thing, and then to be able to funnel that data up to a top level for management or owners to see it.
Yeah.
Or they tried to use it for network throttling, right?
Yeah, which
it's a bad use case, but that's one.
Go
that
use
was
pull
out
DPs.
there. Exactly.
Doing CAS collapse with 2 of my customers right now.
You can use both WFB and SCCM so you can get updates for third-party updates. No, that's not something that's changed recently. That's been around for a while now. It's just component of the dual scan features of how that works. So basically, it's scanning against Microsoft for getting the updates and its policy for that, and then it's scanning against WSUS for the third-party updates. And it does its back for the dual scan. We actually have an article about that. I think I have let me go see if I can find that real quick, and I'll post it in the chat. The TechNet article on it. Or not TechNet. What was the new blog that they created?
Whatever.
The other one.
The other one. It's interesting though, right? Because to achieve that, third-party updates from WSUS and then updates from WFB, you do the thing that everyone was angry about and deliberately trying not to do. You enable dual scan. That's really what's happening. And actually, it's not just third-party updates. You can get them everything from both if you want. Like you can get Microsoft updates from ConfigMgr and from Intune or from WFB. You're just going to get really confused. But it boils down to dual scan. You're going to be able to talk to both, and there's settings that you configure to do it. There's a lot of newer blog content out there. Jordan just linked it, and you can totally do this. It's fully supported, has been. We used to do it actually internally at Patch My PC. We were doing all of our third-party patching from our internal SCCM infrastructure, and then we would get WFB for our updates, and then we eventually dog fooded one of our solutions, and now we're pure Intune.
Nice. What other questions, guys?
Here's one for like compliance items or configuration baselines or something like that. I don't know a whole lot about those, but I'm considering using them because our group policy environment is messed up, to put it nicely, to the point where I wrote this big hairy PowerShell script to put all of our settings into people's machines, including current user stuff. That was an interesting little side adventure, but we're copying a bunch of files, setting a bunch of registry settings. Thank God for getadmx.com that translate all those group policy settings that we thankfully had documented so I could put them into the script. But I'm thinking that maybe, compliance items or baselines or something like that might be a better, more, officially supported solution rather than my hacky PowerShell script. Is that a thing, or if we're considering possibly going to some cloud management in the future, is that going to be a waste of my time? I have to redo it all over again.
There's a website, I believe, that'll actually convert all of your registry settings to config baselines in ConfigMgr.
So they're good for preventing configuration drift. It's totally valid what you're proposing, right? You would break things down probably a bit more granularly. Sounds like you have a big script that does lots of things. You might end up with lots of CIs or lots of baselines, but it's totally valid. I've used CIs to, do the post configuration for line of business applications to ensure that my distribution points all have deduplication configured. To make sure the registry settings for my app are correct, right? You can do all of those things, or I've seen CIs used to maintain the XML files that control feature updates. So there's a lot of ways you can use it. My colleague Andrew and I just posted the link in the chat. We did last year. I guess time flies. It's been a year and a half almost. We did a VSMUG, a Virtual Systems Manager user group around CIs. It's got some pretty solid content in there. And Jordan just mentioned DSC, right? Desired state configuration. It's related, right? You can do this in other ways too. But within ConfigMan, there's nothing wrong with CIs. They're pretty awesome. You said if you're going to go to the cloud, though, and go to Intune, and if you're going to not do co-management, then I don't know, maybe you don't want to go through the trouble. It depends on how many things you're doing. But if you're pretty savvy, Jake said, I don't know if there's a website. There might be. I think there's a PowerShell script or a module that does it. You can feed it registry info, and it'll generate CI for you, right? So
there was
if you know your
settings. I can't find it, though.
Yeah, like you can totally scriptomatically generate CIs to manage all of these things for you.
Yes, if I could do it through script, because I've got all the registry settings in a CSV, and then I had to do it so that, because some of them are basically preferences rather than policy. So, set once and let the user change it if they want afterwards. I don't think I'd be able to do those through a configurator, right?
You could. You just got to get crafty. So you create a script, right? You create a script and you have a set once, and then you set a flag. You need to maintain something somewhere, right? Your remediation script would set a flag. Maybe you have a maintained area in the registry that's like, org-remediation history. And then you assign some flag that says, yeah, this remediation has happened once. Right? It's like a bit that says, okay, it's done. So then your detection does two things. It says, A, do I need to remediate? And B, have I remediated before? Right? And then you check both those conditions, and all of a sudden you've got a preference instead of a policy. So you just got to be creative.
I did link that website. I found it. It will create the check and the remediation script for you based on the registry entry via PowerShell.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
The only thing I'll mention with CIs, there are timeouts. If you start getting crazy complex with scripts, by default, it's going to be 1 minute. So unless you're doing something pretty crazy, it's difficult to hit that.
Yeah, I don't think, even the whole, all the stuff that's going in a local machine can get done in less than a minute, even with my script that's actually verifying each setting. So.
Yep.
Well, thank you.
Is the CI script timeout configurable? Yeah, so it's actually, yes, supported. I'm not sure offhand. So it's in the SCF, if I'm not mistaken, the system configuration file. You can totally change it, but it has a larger scope than you think. So it's the CI script timeout. Now, when I say CI script, I don't just mean configuration items, but I do, right? Detection for an app is a CI. Requirement rules are a CI. Everything like that is a CI, so you're going to have a larger impact than you think when you adjust CI script timeout. But yeah, it's technically changeable, supportable. I'm not sure I can speak to that.
I want to jump back real quick here. There was a question here from Matthew Wolf about what was the value add over ADRs. Was that in regards to like about WFB or what was that question about? I just was trying to understand a little bit about that before we get too far down the rabbit hole here. So like, why would we use WFB over an ADR or something, or something else? See if we get a question or they come off mute. Or not. All right, never mind. Just keep going in the chat for it. Sorry.
Yep. All good.
I like your comment about ADRs though being able to be available now though. I think that's pretty neat.
I am so excited about that. I used to have like a bunch of things about ADRs that I could complain about. Like, don't get me wrong, I love ADRs. I think they're a fantastic method of getting updates out to create automation. They've done a really good job with for what they are, right? They can be incredibly flexible, but definitely available is one of the things that's missing. That was missing, and that was not. And the number of things that used to just get me angry or get me worked up about it have significantly decreased over the years. I will say.
My boss wanted to do something. Yeah. Meaning you want the updates from Intune to be more like what you have in ConfigMan, I'm assuming is what you're saying there, Matthew?
Yeah, I'm a little unclear, right? I don't know that the UI in general in Intune is going to shift towards something like ConfigMan. I mean, it kind of has the Azure look to it.
Right.
Unless it's something you want more granularity, because you can do that with the Graph API, but again, you'd have to use the Graph API for that.
Right. Anyone have experience on wireless Pixie booting?
Go talk to Two Pint.
Actually, I'm gonna say there's I think Oliver Kielspach did a blog post about that. Let me see.
Yeah, I mean,
dangerous. I agree.
Dangerous. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Here we go. Yeah, it was Oliver. All right, I found it. It can go higher. I just don't think anyone would want it to. There you go. See, it's fine. Build WinPE with wireless support, and I want to say that the WinPE that was the beginning of a series that he did. I want to say there's something else about that out there that then he was able to then convert that into Pixie, because once WinPE supports it, the rest of it off it goes. Yes, it summons the dogs.
Yeah, so the other common one is iPixie, right? There's alternatives to the traditional Pixie that you're used to that technically add other things. So it's kind of like a yes, it's possible, but in a lot of people's opinions, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
You mean you don't like re-imaging anybody who connects to your wireless network's computer?
It's a feature.
You guys are imaging? Go to Intune, man.
I mean, it's just imaging by another name. It's fine.
Yeah, I work for a law firm, so we actually do have to seriously wipe machines and re-image them on a regular basis because of all these different ISO compliances and probably HIPAA and who knows what else. So bare metal is we're never going to get completely off of on-prem stuff. We're going to have the ability to image a machine forever, at least for the foreseeable future.
A lot of vendors are coming out with a BIOS deploy option for the OS as well, so eventually you might be able to go with that.
Yeah, we're pretty much a Dell shop, and I have seen some of that.
And Dell's the
haven't
one
dug
that's
too into
actually
it.
leading the charge with that. So You'll probably see it before others.
I've seen it in there and usually turn it off because to me it's potential, a way in, I guess. But I hadn't dug too deep into it either.
Yeah, if it's anything like their BIOS Connect with the vulnerability there, best to stay away from the Gen 1, I think.
Yeah, I turned that off too, and I saw that, and I'm like, no way, no, thank you. That and what is it? They had some sort of like LoJack sort of thing on there too. It's like, no, I don't want all this crap in here. Go away.
Any other questions, guys? We got a little bit of time left. Couple minutes for a last minute question.
I have maybe a stupid question. Maybe I'm being stupid about CIs in a baseline. I'm starting to use them more and more, particularly script CIs where you have a detection script and a remediation script. And I find that if my detection script returns a result that the thing needs to be remediated and runs the remediation script, even if that remediation script, regardless of how that remediation script ends, whether it's successful at remediating the issue or not, the baseline returns compliant because it ran the remediation script, and I guess it just assumes that the thing is remediated. I've worked around that at this point by having another CI in there that checks the same thing and doesn't have a remediation script. But is this something anyone's familiar with? Is that normal behavior that if you have a remediation script in a baseline like that in a CI, that it will always return compliant with the assumption that it remediated the thing? In my experience, yes. Now, if your detection, right, the next time the CI runs, it would eventually eval and tell you that it was. Yeah. So, and I think the other consideration is exit code. So technically, right, you could within your remediation additionally do the detection and throw a non-zero exit code and potentially populate the error stream, and that may move it over to non-compliant. So that's something to keep in mind. I think I theorized about that as well and tried it, and it didn't change the result. It still returned as compliant if it ran that remediation script, even if I exited the remediation script with an error code or false or whatever I'm not looking for. But I'll try it again, and if need be, I'll just stick with the idea of having an additional CI in there that rechecks it.
It should be that if the remediation fails, it doesn't return, as far as I recall from it. I know that the timing on them can be interesting, shall we say. That's one thing I've always struggled with is looking at the reporting codes on it, and the timing of it is that there's some built-in buffering behind the scenes there where it won't let the pieces and parts run faster. I think even if you set the remediation of the times down to a minute, it won't. It's going to wait 15 minutes. So one of the other things that you might want to do and apply there is revalidate it, but apply some extra time to looking at it, to wait period on it, because it might just be that it hasn't actually updated or changed the state yet because of how it's doing that buffering.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And
Paul, that depends on what you're looking for out of it, because you can change what the expected response is from it. It's different, whether it's true or not.
Yeah, so there's some checkboxes in like, okay, return, mark non-compliant if item not found. Like there's some checkboxes in the CIs themselves, and then depends on what you set, right? It can be a Boolean, an integer, it doesn't matter. But yeah, it should, if you don't return, or if you exit non-zero, it should say non-compliant, but interesting if it doesn't. Yeah. I'll try it again. Maybe I when I tested that, retested that, I goofed something, but yeah. Thanks. Oh yeah, what you're looking for. Yeah. I guess in regards to CIs, though, we did link a video. I could probably find it and link it again. Andrew and myself did one for a user group a while back. Could be worth viewing. You know, we do talk about some of these kind of weird caveats and such, and provide some examples of them and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely a when you're first looking into that stuff, there's a lot there. There's a lot of gotchas in there for sure.
Well, we are just about out of time here, guys. Good question. Yeah, great point there. If your remediation return error doesn't return non-compliant, then we can file a bug, Max. If we're certain, you know what I mean? So yeah, like you said, you can do a double check, and then we can take it from there.
Yeah, thanks. I'll holler.
Yeah, definitely let me know. I can run through it in my lab as well, and see if I'm seeing the same things. All right, well, listen, guys, we're out of time here now. I appreciate everybody coming in. I really appreciate everybody helping answer all the questions that came in from the group. Very, very helpful. And again, thankful for the group for bringing the question forward, because this is exactly what I was hoping for. We got a lot of really great questions and a lot of really great discussion. And one thing that you hear all the time is that if you're thinking the question, there's a really good chance someone else is, or they're dealing with the same exact thing. So again, thank you for everybody that's asking the questions, and a huge thank you to all the guys at Patch My PC, Justin and team, for coming on and providing content today. Very, very much appreciated. Again, don't forget, head out to the meetup site, meetup.com/Kleeskug. To follow us. We will have another event sometime this fall, probably in the November-December timeframe. I will be seeking out speakers. If you're interested in that, hit me up on Twitter, or just shoot me an email, or hit me up on Teams. We'll start building out that speaker list now. So if you want to speak, or someone that wants to speak, let me know. We'll get you added to the calendar. I think, like I said earlier, I want to focus on some cloud stuff next week. Maybe we'll do tenant attached and some other Intune management things. So be on the lookout for that. But again, thanks everybody, and have a great day and a great weekend.